Hello again. Here I am back with another episode of the Biblionaut. Um, I was thinking about the recommendations that I put out yesterday, and there'll be there could be 1,000 objections to the books that I mentioned, and people wanting to add others that might be more relevant to them. I'll just remember, it was just sort of a very quick rundown of a few books that I think that, um, again, I don't want to say that they're necessary. I just feel like that if you wanted to know more about American literature, that those books that I mentioned yesterday would at least get you started. There's plenty other names that I skipped over that I didn't talk about. John Steinbeck was one that came to mind yesterday when I was thinking, and another modern author that I have enjoyed two that I think is very worthwhile is Marilyn Robinson. So those are just two off the top of my head, and one other aspect of American culture that I didn't really cover very well was the immigrant experience, which was huge, and many authors dealt with that immigrant experience, especially say in the 30s and 40s. They were writing about like what it was like to grow up in a second generation immigrant, or maybe their parents came over on a boat, or however they had come, and it some of the authors that dealt with that. Um, uh, Joseph Roth was one. Call It Sleep. That I haven't read that. I have it on my shelves. That's one that's kind of considered to be a very important novel dealing with the immigrant situation. And another one that's pretty good. It's a more of a modern novel, but it's still considered sort of a contemporary classic. Is Ragtime by E.L. Doctorow, and I enjoyed that. But it's been a long time since I read it, so it may not hold up quite as well as it did when I first read it. But I think it's worthwhile. Hmm. Okay, so today, really, I wanted to do a short one, a short episode here. I'm always talking about all these going to thrift shops and library sales and what have you, and that I say that that's a good source. So this few days ago, I took a trip around my hometown here and investigated several stores. I think I went to let's see, one, two, three, four, five or so stores, and it took about 3 hours. And for me, a lot of the enjoyment was the hunt. I enjoyed just looking through books. Of course, again, if you're looking through thrift stores, you're gonna go through a lot of things that you're not interested in. And you may find a lot of you know, and again, I don't want to denigrate any kind of book because there's an audience for them out there somewhere, but for me, I'm not really interested much in religious commentary. Well, I don't mind religious commentary, but inspirational, I guess, inspirational writing and self-help, that kind of thing. Coming of age stories. There's a lot of that kind of stuff that I'm not. Memoirs. Especially celebrity memoirs. I really do not like celebrity memoirs. But at any rate, I have to look through a lot of that kind of thing, plus a lot of fiction that I've already decided that I've read some and I don't need to read any more. Some of your more popular writers, like I think I've mentioned before, James Patterson, Danielle Steele, John Grisham. These writers, I've either dipped in and decided those weren't for me, or have read all that I want to read of those authors, but they are so prolific that you just can't help but run into a ton of their books. So, but if you like those authors, those are such great resources for you because you're going to be able to pick up stuff very inexpensively, and and be able to stock your shelves with as much of that kind of thing as you want. Okay, but so what I wanted to do anyway was I wanted to show an example of just a typical one day. I ended up buying a few books and just show you the things that I picked up, and whether these may not be of interest. I'm not recommending these. I'm just saying that they were of interest to me, and the price was right, and the condition of the book, was nice, and so I opted to pick them up. The first place I stopped, I grabbed 3 books, and this first book is called Wool, and it's a fairly new novel. Hugh Howey. It's a science fiction story. It's about far in the future, and I picked this one up. First of all, the price was right, 50 cents, and it's almost a brand new copy. So I've mentioned before, there are some places that will buy back your books. So if this is a book that I read and I felt like it wasn't something that I wanted to keep, this would be a very good kind of a book that I would probably take back to, say, Books A Million, or maybe even trade it in as credit at another bookstore to help defray the costs of whatever I decide to buy next. So to me, let's say I spent 50 cents on it and somebody gives me a quarter for it later on, well, that 25 cents was my rental fee, I suppose. Yeah. So at any rate, this book, well, if you're not into science fiction, that's probably not something that you're going to be interested in. But it made a noise a while back. I heard people talking about it. Some people enjoyed it, and I thought it might be worth my time. Give it a try. If I don't like it, I don't have to read the whole thing. If I read 50 pages and say, well, this isn't really very good, then I don't have to read it anymore. I read something here not too long ago that was pretty good. They said, somebody, wherever it was on the internet, it says, however old you are, subtract that from 100 and give whatever book you're reading that many pages, so that the older that you get, the less time you want to waste on something that may not be what you're looking for, because you don't have that much more time to waste. And I think they said that if you're over 100, read whatever you want. So there you go. The next book at this same place that I picked up, A Journal of the Plague Year by Daniel Defoe. You should know Daniel Defoe, or you may know Daniel Defoe is the author of Robinson Crusoe. There was a few other books that he wrote. This Journal of a Plague Year, I'm under the impression that this is actually a fictionalized account of this time. It was written like about 60 years or so after the actual plague that swept through London. And anyway, this is Defoe's account of that. It's these Penguin classics, I think you can never go wrong. They're very distinctive. They all look very similar. They have that black band at the bottom, and some kind of an illustration on top. And the thing about these is this is one of those publishers that I talk about when you sort of develop a kind of a I don't know if I'd necessarily say trust, but at least you respect that they are attempting to put out some classic and worthwhile fiction. I tend to use that word worthwhile too much. So they're trying to put out some books that are again not must reads, but that you if you ran across these, like I did this one. I ran across this very inexpensive, and I don't really have to think about whether this is a book that I want or not. I can trust the publisher has done the footwork and found literature that is probably going to be things that I'm interested in. Again, that's not no for sure thing. I might read a few pages and decide this isn't for me. I don't have any desire to read any further, and that's fine. I haven't risked a lot, a little bit of time hunting it down, which is actually fine because that's what I was going to do anyway. So it wasn't like I went out specifically looking for this book. At any rate, this one here I'm actually rather intrigued at reading. I think it right up my alley. But at any rate, so there's that one. And then the third book I found at that particular, it was a little library store, is a book by a man named Mircea Eliade. He's a French writer, and he wrote most of his writing was back around the mid-century, last century, and he did a lot of comparative studies of myths and religions and just basic cultural cultural activities that people might have done either in the past or continue to do, and tracing out similarities and The idea kind of is that many of these um, rights or um, belief systems are connected. You know that because we are all human, that we all share certain ways of communicating things, and that many of these myths were tied to each other because either because that was the easiest and best way to explain these things to ourselves, or because of the interpopulation, the people moving around the world, people moving around and spreading these uh, ideas, uh, stories, what have you. And so he traces out a lot of this one is called Myths, Dreams, and Mysteries. The encounter between contemporary faiths and archaic realities. So, wow, how could I resist, right? And this publisher, this is a Harper Torch book, okay, and you can usually see them. They're very distinctive, or to me they are anyway. And Harper Torch books put out a lot of books back in the middle of last century, the 50s, 60s, 60s more really. And I always find their titles interesting. They almost always appeal to me in some way, shape, or form. They seem to be a no joke kind of a publisher. They published a lot of kind of, I wouldn't really call it offbeat because not all of it was, but some of it was a little bit offbeat. It was uh, it wasn't fringe literature or fringe investigations. But it was close. You know, like this sort of thing, this kind of investigation into humanities of myths and religions. That that sort of investigation is a little bit off the beaten path, and Harper Torch books were certainly willing to follow a lot of that kind of investigation. Not exclusively. I mean, they published many more what you might think of as traditional or just plain nonfiction. I guess I don't know how to describe it any better than that. But I just find that I thought that the level of scholarship for the books that were published by Harper Torch books was good. It was good for me. It's a little bit higher, I think, than sometimes what I might find today. That's just my opinion. Okay, so there was those three. Um, the next place that I went to, I found. Um, okay, this is the exploration of the Colorado River and its canyons by J.W. Powell. This is taken from the diaries of one of the early explorers. I really like this. It's pretty neat. It had a lot of really cool lithographs in it and wood carvings, what have you. And this was, a group of people who were really filling in the last white spaces in the American map. They didn't know much about the Colorado River. It was very dangerous at the time, and not that it isn't now, but at the time, you didn't have any kind of backup or any kind of support. So I don't get a whole lot of explorers or travel logs. I don't do a tremendous a lot of that. Sometimes I do. I guess it probably depends on the mood I'm in on that day when I run across something. This one, I don't know. I think it was probably a combination of the edition, which I thought was kind of neat with the little lithographs and the price, and maybe I just wanted to buy a book that day. Sometimes that's happened before. That's why I have so many books. I just wanted to buy a book that day. Anyway, I like this publisher too. These are the Dover books. They're inexpensive. Mostly they publish things in the public domain. They're still published today. I think they were a little classier back maybe in the '60s when this was published, but you can still find a lot of inexpensive titles. And you'll see a lot of them today, though, the Dover thrift editions. So you might find, I don't know, just off the top of my head, let's say Robinson Crusoe. We were just talking about him. Let's say they might have an edition of Robinson Crusoe, but it's not going to have a big, lengthy introduction or a whole lot of footnotes. It's going to be bare bones. You're just going to get basically that text. If you wanted to read a Robinson Crusoe that might be annotated or might have a long introduction or a lot of footnotes, then that Penguin Classics is probably the kind of publisher that you would be looking for that. Okay, this next book, uh, and it's called Burke's Politics. Okay, this. All right, I don't know why I bought this. This kind of a book. Okay, so it's a hardback. It's in nice shape. It's in decent shape. It's from the 40s. This is these kind of books. I don't know. There's like a magnet to me. I don't know. It really makes much difference what the title is. I like this binding. I like everything about it. It just screams class, I guess, to me, or knowledge, or something. I don't know. It's hard to describe. But I liked him, and it was inexpensive. It was $1, I think, and so I went ahead and picked it up. Burke was a conservative politician, statesman in England in the time of, say, from the American Revolution through the French Revolution, and in fact, one of his biggest or most well-known works is Reflections on the Revolution in France. So he went over there and observed, and he wasn't he wasn't too crazy about it because basically the French Revolution, they went crazy over there. Anyway, but this book has some selection of his speeches and his writings and what have you. And it's not something that was on my radar. It's not something that I was looking for. It's not something that I doubt I will get to it very soon at all. But books like this, these older, like especially from the 40s, nice solid hardbacks, they're disappearing. And I think I call these my puppy dog books because it's like when you walk by the pet store and you see the puppy dogs in the cages, you just want to take them home because you're afraid, that they just don't look like they're being taken care of. You don't know what's going to happen to them. So these are kind of my puppy dog books. I take them home, and they'll be on my shelf until I pass on, and then my wife will probably have a big garage sale, so maybe somebody else will get it then. Okay, so that was another small library store that I went to. Then I stopped at the Salvation Army, and it was really weird because right after finding that one Mircea Eliade book, I ran into another one. So this one, maybe not quite as good a shape as the other one was, but still, this one didn't even cost me 50 cents. So I mean, it was almost like they were giving it away. So how can I resist? This one is Myth and Reality. Same basic thing, looking at myths and how they touch on our lives and how they interrelate around the world. I thought it was kind of bizarre to run into two Mircea Eliade books in one day at two different places. It just doesn't seem like he's somebody that would be out there that much. But I don't know. Maybe my hometown is a big Eliade place. I don't know. Anyway, so and then this one. Sometimes I run across a book that I didn't really have on my radar. It wasn't really anything that I was looking for, but it's in either a unique edition or a very nice copy or things like that, and I might pick them up. Like I said, especially if they're in a very nice copy, I always feel like I have a good chance of recouping at least some of what I spent on it. Even if I didn't like the book, I still have an outlet to. Like I said, there's several stores around me where I can either take them in and maybe they will give me a cash offer for them, or they'll give me a credit offer and then I can take them in and then I can look at that store and maybe just swap some books. So it'll keeps these books going in circulation, keeps them out there, keeps them going around. Instead of sometimes I think these thrift stores, after this book's been on a shelf for a long time, I don't know. They probably get pulped, or somebody just comes along and buys them in bulk, and who knows what happens to them. So, but anyway, this one, like I said, not really on my radar at this time, but it was The Ugly American. This book was actually written back in the 50s, but this is a newer, almost brand new. I couldn't say it's more than 10 years old, if that. And but The Ugly American was kind of an expose at that time of American foreign policy and how perhaps, I'm not saying I agree with this or disagree with this, just that from this point of view, that perhaps American foreign policy wasn't taking into consideration enough the peoples who it was dealing with, their wants and desires, and may have been kind of run roughshod over the other country that they were trying to help. Okay, this one takes place in Southeast Asia or Vietnam, So I think we kind of know that the experience in Vietnam probably could have been done much differently. And some people might say, American hubris caused some of the issues that went on there. I don't know if I agree with that. I don't know. I'm not making any kind of a statement one way or another about that. All I'm saying is that is an opinion, and a book like this talks about that. Now, well, after I read this book, then I can say, well, I think he's got some points, or I don't. That's part of what reading's about. We don't have to read, be in lockstep with what we read, and we shouldn't. I don't think. I think we should approach everything as from a neutral point of view, and perhaps the author, is convincing, or perhaps he leads you in another direction, or perhaps you just completely disagree, and that's good. That's as it should be. Okay, then the last place I stopped at another little library and found a couple more things. Last couple things. This one here is by the New York Review of Books Classics imprint. Okay, so it's very distinctive. All of their books have this center square in it, and with the title, and they're all paperback. I don't know if they do hardbacks. They do very few. And this is another one of those imprints that when I find them for this kind of 50 cents, when I find them for that, I just pick them up because they're a quality imprint. I'm trusting or at least relying on the publishers to have been done their due diligence, have done their homework, and are presenting titles that are at least of some kind of interest. Now, this particular title, I may not find it interesting. It's about a jazz musician, which is not something that I necessarily would have picked up. I certainly wouldn't have bought it brand new because it's just not necessarily something that I think interests me. But for 8 bits, I think it's worthwhile at least check it out. And again, it's one of those kind of books that to me has a certain resale value. That's not what my purpose is. I'm just saying that it sort of underwrites my reading. If I go pick these books up and then I decide that they are not what I'm looking for, then I feel a little bit more at ease picking them up in the first place, knowing that I can get rid of them later and without a problem. Okay, and then the last book, Half a Yellow Sun by a woman named Adichie. She's a Nigerian woman, Chimamanda Adichie. And I just read a book of hers not just a couple weeks ago. While I was on vacation, I took a book of hers with me. It's called Purple Hibiscus. And Purple Hibiscus was good. I like it. It was kind of a coming of age story, which is really not what I'm interested in, but it was also an interesting exploration of Nigerian life. I won't say that it was great. I kind of thought it was a middle of the road type of novel, but it was her first novel, and I thought that perhaps she may mature as a writer, and I'd be interested to see read the points that I thought were strong points in her Purple Hibiscus. I would like to see read more about. And hopefully the things that I thought maybe weren't so strong, that she's moved on as a writer and gotten better. I don't know. We'll see. And but Adichie is one of the modern writers that is very highly touted right now. She's very popular. That doesn't mean anything. People sometimes take up a cause or a writer or a book, and without necessarily meriting being taken up. But just based on that one experience that I had, I thought, well, she would be worth trying again. And that was, that Purple Hibiscus. I picked that up in the same manner as I picked these up, 50 cents somewhere, maybe if at the most $1. I doubt I would have spent more than that because I wasn't familiar with her. So it's easy to kind of take a flyer on these things when you only spending that little bit. So at any rate, that is just kind of an example. So all right, so those books that I went over there, I didn't even spend $5. So at any rate, that is it for this edition. Again, if you find the things that I'm talking about interesting, leave a comment, subscribe, and or if there's other things you'd like to hear me talk about, let me know. All right.